when we have scientific studies and evidence and data to back up something, it gives us that quote unquote permission slip to truly believe it. It really validates it in our minds, which makes sense. Part of the scientific process is having validity, having data, repeated studies, repeated evidence again and again and again to back up certain claims. So along with it just being my highest joy to research this stuff and bringing this topic, I think it's going to give you that quote unquote permission slip to kind of buy into some of the things I talk about on here, which you don't need a permission slip. You are your own permission slip, but sometimes you just need that little extra oomph to really believe and embody something. Welcome to Alignment Adventures. This is a podcast where we explore what it means to live a fulfilling, aligning, and present life. I'm your host, Lindsay Tanner, and I am so grateful that you are here. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Alignment Adventures. As always, I am so excited that you are here, and I am extra excited about today's topic. We are finally doing an episode really covering the connection between science and spirituality. And I actually see this as a series because there are quite a few topics that I came up with that we can cover on here. And honestly, this is something that I've been feeling called to do for a long time. And I kind of have done here and there, just in random episodes that I've covered. And of course, guests that I've had on, they brought in scientific studies into the topics of living your most aligned life and spirituality and all the things we discuss on here. But I really just want to devote a whole episode and multiple episodes to this topic. And to be honest and transparent, I think I've been delaying this for a long time because, as I've said many times, I've been feeling this call for a long time, but I've been delaying doing it because I feel that sneaky perfectionism coming in. It's just such a beautiful topic that I want to do justice to. So when I have that feeling, sometimes I'll push it off because I'm I just don't feel like I'm qualified yet, which is so silly because I was a science teacher for 5 years, then I worked in a science curriculum for 4 years. I have my degree in science. I love learning about science, and I've been doing this podcast for 3 years. So it's just those mind stories that keep coming in, and I just always want to be open and transparent about those. But let's get into today's topic. So one of the main reasons I love bringing in science to spiritual topics or to woo-woo topics or into any topics about living your most aligned life is because so many times when we have scientific studies and evidence and data to back up something, it gives us that quote unquote permission slip to truly believe it. It really validates it in our minds, which makes sense. Part of the scientific process is having validity, having data, repeated studies, repeated evidence again and again and again to back up certain claims. So along with it just being my highest joy to research this stuff and bringing this topic, I think it's going to give you that quote unquote permission slip to kind of buy into some of the things I talk about on here, which you don't need a permission slip. You are your own permission slip, but sometimes you just need that little extra oomph to really believe and embody something. Now, a few other things I want to say before we get into the definition of spirituality and the definition of science is we have to acknowledge that what we do not know is so much greater than what we do know. Just think about that for a second. How much information we do not know is beyond our minds greater than the information we do know. And we know a lot of information. Think of all the studies that have been done, all of the recent revelations that we've had in the field of science, even in the last 50 to 100 years, massive amounts of growth in that area. But there's still so much we don't know. And that's the magical part about science is it's always changing. It's always adapting as we learn new things. Now, I also want to bring in someone that has really inspired me in this topic and someone that my mom introduced me to. I'm sure some of you may or may not be familiar with him, but that is Carl Sagan. He was an astronomer, just a huge figure in the science movement, especially in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I think he passed away in the 90s. One of my favorite movies is based off one of his books. It's called Contact. Go and check out that movie if you're into this stuff. Such a good movie. I have a lot of favorite movies, but that one is up there. But I want to quote something from him directly that I found in an article, and I'm going to be linking all the stuff that I'm talking about just in case you're interested. Like a true scientist, you got to back up your research, right? But he said, science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. So another reason I want to bring these topics together is so many times we see them as separate. You've got like the logical, scientific people, and you've got the spiritual, woo-woo feelings people. Like, I definitely lean towards the latter, but I also have so much respect for science, and I love learning things about our universe and how it works. What's also interesting about Carl Sagan is I actually had one of his books underneath my computer, propping it up. You can see it on Instagram in one of the pictures that I showed. It's called Cosmos, and it's a book he wrote, I believe, in 1980, and he also did a TV series with it, which they actually redid with Neil deGrasse Tyson in 2014. Such an epic series, and I'm so excited to read this book, even though it's probably a little outdated since it was written in 1980. Some of the information and the way he explains it is so good. So he was an astronomer, like I said, and he really does a good job of connecting like the vastness of the universe to humanity and how it affects us, because it can be very overwhelming thinking about the cosmos and space and all of that. Now, another thing I want to say is that I got a lot of my information from a source called Big Think, and I did some research to make sure that this was, a reputable source, and it's actually owned by a company called Free Think Media, and here's like their slogan. They said, at Free Think, we believe that daily news should inspire people to build a better world. While most media is fueled by toxic politics and negativity, we focus on solution. The smartest people, the biggest ideas, and the most groundbreaking technology shaping our future. Just absolutely love that. So if you're wanting like a news source that's not like the toxic stuff we see all the time, go check out Big Think. And again, I will link all of it in the show notes. Okay, let's get into the definition of spirituality. So, like we said, we are explaining the difference between the two and also explaining how they're connected. And I'm also going to dive into one of the most groundbreaking topics that connects the two. Now, the thing about spirituality, when you Google it, you're going to get lots of different definitions. And a lot of them, especially the ones that come from like Webster Dictionary or Oxford, have to do with religion or something with the church. That is definitely an aspect of spirituality. Spirituality is connected to religion, but I love this definition from the Royal College of Psychiatrics. It says spirituality involves the recognition of a feeling or sense or belief that there's something greater than myself, something more to being human than just the sensory experience, and that the greater whole of which we are a part of is cosmic or divine in nature. Absolutely love that definition. So in general, spirituality is just like being connected to your spirit, right? Hence the name, being connected to something greater than you. A lot of people I know say that, like they may not believe in quote unquote God. I know that can be a heavy word for a lot of people, but they believe in a higher power, or they believe in something, they just don't know what it is. And I think that spirituality is a part of all of us, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. We all have spirits, we all have souls, and it's just connecting with that part of you that is greater than all of us. It's like that part of us that is all connected to each other. Okay, so that is spirituality. Science is the systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation, experimentation, and the testing of theories against evidence obtained. Now that's just the beautiful Oxford definition. So really, science is just our way of understanding our world. And another thing that they pointed out from this Think Big article, they said not only is science like the body of knowledge that we've collected about our universe, about our natural world, but it's those processes we use to investigate and learn about our natural world and the universe, like that scientific inquiry, the scientific method, investigating, questioning, hypothesizing, experimenting, drawing conclusions, all of that stuff. So not only is science like the stuff that we know, but it's also the processes we use to figure out that stuff. Now, here's an important part. As robust as evidence can be, like as robust as it can be to have evidence that's backing up a claim, science has limits. It just does. It has limits to everything. And that's not a bad thing. We just have to acknowledge it. And it seems like science tends to answer the how something happens, and spirituality can answer the why something happens. So interesting. I personally am very interested in the why things happen. Another thing I found from my research here, and I just want to point it out before we continue when it comes to science. So I said science has limits. There's also something called Gibson's Law. Now, I never heard of this, but this definitely pertains to this day and age. We have all the information we need at our fingertips. That's the beautiful thing. You can sit and research this stuff and just have it all at your fingertips, which, by the way, researching this was one of the funnest things I've done in a long time. Like, I lit a candle, I put on my glasses, I got some hot coffee, and I was just in the zone, like in another time and space. Talk about alignment activities when I was researching all of this. But anyways, back to Gibson's Law. This is an observation that for every PhD, there's an equal and opposite PhD. What they're saying is that for every expert you have on a topic, there's an expert on the topic opposite to that. Basically saying for whatever point you want to prove, you can usually find evidence supporting that point. So I just want to put that out there. That is why there's so many opinions out there. And it also has a lot to do with like how the data is organized, how the data is interpreted. Like that's our humanness coming back in, right? We try to be systematic and objective about science in general, but our humanness still comes in, and we have a reality that we just truly don't fully understand, and we're going to get into that. So I just want to point that out. When it comes to science, this is a huge limit of science. You can usually find evidence that supports all claims. Like there's even evidence out there supporting the people that think that the earth is flat. Now, I'm not going to even touch that topic. Obviously, as a science teacher and in my experience, I don't think there's any validity to that, but I'm just saying you can go out there and find evidence to support that. That's just something to keep in mind when it comes to all of that. That's why we have to be in touch with our intuition. That's why we have to have that connection with ourselves and really have discernment when it comes to all this information. Since we have access to it all, we really have to tune into what resonates with us. And that's such an important part when combining science and spirituality. Now, in one of the first articles that I read, I literally just Googled like connecting spirituality and science. It was this article talking about how Carl Sagan really was one of the pioneers in bringing these two together. I mean, there's so many, but he just did a lot of work in this area. And in this article, it talked about how Carl Sagan discussed almost having like a cosmic world religion that's centered around scientific concepts and new technologies and the fact that we're all connected and there's no us versus them. We're all in this together, just trying to create the best world that we can. Like, can you even imagine something like that? That just blows my mind. I think it's totally possible. I actually think we're on the way to that. We just have to clear out all the other stuff, and that's why the world looks so crazy sometimes. And it also kind of connects to this analogy that I've heard so many times. Like, think of all of us as neurons in the brain or cells in the body, the more connections we have between ourselves, between humans, between us and the animals and us and other parts of our reality, the better the system functions. Like that's how a computer works. The more connections, the better the processing, right? And I know AI is such a hot topic that is something completely different we could cover in a different topic, but just something to consider. Like if we had this like cosmic religion, which I even hate to use that word again, it's very loaded, but like this cosmic connection between us all, which we do, we have this connection, but if we all realize this connection between all of us, think of what kind of world that would create. One more quote from Carl Sagan before we move on. He said, "You are not a cosmic accident. You are a cosmic imperative." So good. Okay, let's end this episode by talking about the nature of reality. So like I said, I think this is going to be a series where we are bringing in the scientific evidence to back up spiritual topics. And we're going to start with a deep one, and that is the nature of reality. So you've heard me talk about quantum physics before here on the podcast, but let's just kind of revisit that. So, and some of you may not be on board with all of this. If you're not a science girly like me, totally get it. Take what resonates, leave the rest. Maybe this episode isn't for you. Maybe this series isn't for you. Totally respect that. But let's go back to science class for a little bit. If it was traumatizing for you, I'm sorry. Maybe if I was your science teacher, it would have been a better experience. I would hope it would be. But we're in science class and you're learning about the atom, right? We know that all matter is made up of atoms, and we are taught that atoms have this certain type of look to them, right? There's a model of the atom with the nucleus in the center, and then you've got the electrons orbiting outside of it. Almost looks like a mini solar system, right? Well, as we get smaller and smaller and smaller, as we observe particles that are that tiny, which if you forgot how tiny an atom is, there's like a million atoms in a grain of salt or something like that. They're teeny, teeny, tiny. As we get that small, things get much weirder than we may expect them to be. Like the traditional laws of physics, like Newton's laws of physics, do not apply at this tiny, tiny level. Like things really get supernatural there. So we know from our perception, we live in a physical reality, right? Like a table's a table, the cup of coffee in front of you is a cup of coffee, your body is your physical body. But if you zoom in to the quantum level, the atomic level, things really get freaky. So let's bring in a famous German physicist, Werner Heisenberg, which I do want to point out. If you look him up, if you research him, he was a physicist in Germany in World War II. There's a lot of stuff you can look up with that, but just so you know. But Werner Heisenberg is very famous for something he described called the uncertainty principle. Some of this stuff is hard to explain, so I'm going to try to explain it as simply as possible. Basically, what the uncertainty principle is stating is that we cannot pinpoint the position of an object with arbitrary precision. So basically what that is saying is we can't say for certain that the location of an object is the exact location of an object. Let me explain. Okay, so we know that all matter is made up of atoms. And if you look at the anatomy of an atom, you've got the nucleus in the center with the protons and the neutrons, and the nucleus is tiny. My favorite analogy to tell my students was that if the nucleus was a golf ball in the center of the football field, the electrons are on the outside of the football field. But what's even more interesting is that the electrons aren't just orbiting on the outside. They're actually in a cloud around the nucleus of the atom, a cloud of possibility. The electrons are everywhere at once, like they're not in one specific spot. And what study after study after study has shown is that when we are observing these electrons, they're in a specific spot. But when we're not observing them, they are in that cloud of probability. So since we are made up of atoms, what we're saying is that like everything wiggles a little bit, everything vibrates, which we know, right? Like we are vibrational beings, we are energetic beings. to our core, to the very building blocks that make us up, our atoms. They are vibrating, they are wiggling, and they technically don't exist in a specific spot until they're being observed. This just like blows my mind. And this connects to so many things that I've talked about here or pondered myself, or things I've heard from other spiritual teachers on how this reality is maybe more of an illusion than we realize it is, or it's more of a simulation than we think it is. And I'm not saying this to scare you. Why I'm like even talking about this is to make you realize how much power you have. Like I always say, you're the creator of your reality. And how you're doing that is by observing it. Your perception, your observation is literally collapsing the electron waves to form reality. So there's something called an electron wave function. In summary, the electrons of a particle can be in a variety of positions. Like I said, like a cloud of probability around the atom. It isn't until it's observed that we can measure it in one specific spot. And they even say that the electron is nowhere until it's measured. Before it's measured, it can be everywhere that it is possible to be. So my interpretation is our reality is full of limitless possibilities. It is truly our observation, our interpretation that gives meaning to our reality. On a scientific level, it isn't until we observe these electrons that they're in a specific spot. Quantum physics is so freaking exciting and so cool. I hope I explained that well, and I hope you are like grasping what I'm saying here. It just blows my mind to think of these concepts. Like on an atomic level, reality is nothing as we perceive it to be. And we have so much power in this creative process. We are the creators of our life, of our interpretation of this reality. So I do not want you to forget that. I want you to use this scientific study as your permission slip to fully believe that every time you observe something, every time you bring your awareness to something, you are collapsing that electron wave function to make that a physical object. Like mind blown. So freaking cool. We are going to dive into so many more topics like this. We're going to continue to talk about quantum physics. There's quantum entanglement, which proves how all things are connected. We're going to talk about epigenetics, which is how you can change your genetics with behaviors that you do. We're going to talk about time and how time is not how we perceive it. I've kind of touched on that one already, but we'll bring in the science to that. And I also want to bring in things like brain states, how we can get in different brain states and how that can help us live our most aligned life, like when we're in meditation or when we're stressed out or in childhood, how that affects us. And also another one I have written down is like the real story of evolution. Like there's more to evolution than we are taught with Darwin and his whole story. So if you like this episode, let me know. I know this is a little bit different, but man, guys, I was geeking out so hard researching all this stuff. Like I said, I will link all the articles if you want to go check it out yourself, or just Google these things on your own. There's so much out there about Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle. There's so much out there on quantum physics. You can watch YouTube videos if you want, if that's a better way for you to understand. But I just can't think of anything that's more fascinating than understanding the nature of our reality and how much like power it gives us. Like I think we just forget how powerful we are in the creation of our life. Like I've been saying on here all along, you're the creator of your reality. So if you like this, please screenshot it, share it with me on Instagram. Any takeaways you have at Lindsay with an A-M as in Michelle Tanner. Please share this episode with anyone that you think needs to hear this specific message or would find this very interesting. Maybe any science nerds in your life, which I proudly claim that title. I'm a multifaceted person. I'm a science nerd. I'm a woo-woo girl. I'm a little witchy, a little hippie. I'm just all over the place. We're all multifaceted, and that's okay. If you are new here, please subscribe. We have new episodes each week. And I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be covering some spiritual/science topics. I do have more interviews scheduled. I'm not sure when they will be coming up, but we do like to sprinkle interviews in every once in a while. And I just hope this episode served you. I hope you found it fascinating. I hope it serves you in your pursuit, your adventure of living your most aligning, fulfilling, and present life. I'm sending you so much love, all the highest vibes, and of course, I will see you in the next episode of Alignment Adventures.